You are listening to Our Urban Voices with Dr. Alphonse Javed, a podcast that presents Christian narratives through diverse voices that impact urban ministry. Here is your host.
In this podcast, we cover everything from churches and church planting efforts, mission and missions organization evangelism, and unreached people groups, emerging movements and initiatives, justice, current events related to faith, and the persecuted church, to author interviews, and more. Let's get to it. I'm so glad that you're here with us, and we've been working together in New York City for some time, and thank you for your partnership. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience, but also share a little bit about your family, your background, and your ministry.
Thank you, Dr. Javed, for having me to your podcast. I've been looking forward to this. My name is Boto Joseph, for the listeners out there, pastor in Jackson Heights, New York City. Our neighborhood has been named the one city block that holds the world. And it's a very, very diverse neighborhood. But before being a pastor, I am husband to Lisha. We've been married 12 years. We have 4 kids, 6 years and under. And we call Jackson Heights home. So we've been here, it'd be close to 15 years of ministry.
How did you come up with okay, I need to start ministry here in New York? So what led you, how you felt the call? Share a little bit about your calling to this ministry, and especially in this city.
Yeah. I was born and raised in India the first 20 years of my life. My grandfather was the first Christian from a Hindu background. And even my dad, at the age of 19, was when he gave his life to the Lord. And so, by the time we were born and raised, we were born and raised in a church setting. And to be honest, took that for granted the first 20 years of my life in India. And, I had said the prayer, I had taken baptism back in India. But when I came here to New York, I think that's where I really experienced the power and the beauty of the gospel. So I call it my second conversion experience here in New York City. And that led me, Dr. Javed, to a seminary upstate New York. I just was sure of God's calling upon my life. And it was in those years in seminary when the Lord began to open up my eyes to unreached people groups. And here's the thing, we both are from South Asia. I came to know that the least reached peoples are my people. India still has the highest unreached people groups. That became such a burden in my heart. And so 2009, the year I was graduating, something, it's almost funny that happened was the director of my seminary went as a missionary to India. Now he's from, I think it was from Mississippi or Alabama, so he went as a missionary to India. And for me, I moved to Jackson Heights, New York City as an Indian, to be a missionary, to reach our people, South Asians in New York City. So that was our journey. Lisha and we got married in 2009, and we really came to Jackson Heights, New York City as missionaries to South Asians.
So what your experience has been, so you talk about spending time and living in India for a period of time, actually, most of your early life. So when it comes to ministry, and we know that Jackson Heights is, especially when it comes to South Asians, it's almost like a little India. So how do you find your work here different? How is it different from work back in India in that context? One, two, how is it different working as a family, you and your wife, right? Working as a family, serving together here versus somebody serving back home, especially looking at your grandfather and his ministry and all that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A mentor of mine said this some time ago that, there was a time when missionaries went out from the West to the ends of the earth. But now the ends of the earth have come to the West, in a sense. And like you rightly mentioned, Dr. Javed, that, Jackson Heights has been known as Little India, Little Pakistan. Now it's known as Little Bangladesh. The 5 people groups that really make up our neighborhood, and among others, are people from India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Tibet. We're looking at 5 nations that have some of the highest, least peoples that have been reached. So it's a great opportunity for us. And the way I look at it is this. First of all, people from these countries that still have the highest unreached people groups are very religious people. India, the country of my birth, is also the birthplace of Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism. If you are born in India, you're born into a swimming pool of world religion. So there, 330 million gods and goddesses in India. And yet, we have a spiritual starvation. People are still searching and looking. And as we speak, today, the month of May 2021, India is going through one of the worst hit times of pandemic, and people are seeking for answers. And so for Lisha and I and our church here, Jackson Heights Community Church, we want to share the gospel, which alone can satisfy the hungers of the people, which alone can quench the thirst of people. So even in our neighborhood, I think what's wonderful is people are ready, even eager to have spiritual conversations. So we can immediately have spiritual conversations and talk about God and talk about salvation. Heaven and hell is so real to Muslims and Hindus. So people are not only spiritually hungry, but they're also eager to have those conversations. And I think having good conversations is key for us. We know from the life of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ how he spoke to each one differently. And he was a master in having conversations to really go deep into the hearts of people. And so even in our neighborhood, not only are people spiritually hungry, but the types of people here, the South Asians that we meet in New York City have 2 unique identities. First, they are breadwinners for their family, which means second, they are decision makers. So not only are they influential people who live here, but they are really the doorkeepers of not only their family here, but back home in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. So the opportunities are tremendous.
I love this. I love what you just said, that these are the folks who are the breadwinner. They are the one, and I totally resonate with that. When somebody is in the United States from one of the countries, third world countries, or even especially the South Asian countries, somehow it elevates your status back home. And when you say something, it means holds value. Talk to me a little more about this aspect, that how when a person comes to Christ here, how that can contribute to opening new doors back home, simply because now this person is regarded as somebody who made it, knows, and is held on in a way, on a honorable at an honorable position where people wants to hear from him.
Right. No, this is such an important aspect, because I'll tell you, I can't count the number of times I have had WhatsApp video calls back to Pakistan, to Nepal, and to India through new believers here. So let me give you at least a couple of examples, if I can. 2 years ago, we had a Nepali brother from a Hindu background who came. We met. The Lord saved him, and he surrendered his life to the Lord. We baptized him. And the next thing that happened was we were starting to have conversations with his family back in Nepal. And I would even have opportunities to pray for their family back in Nepal. Another example will be that of a brother and a sister, siblings from a Hindu North Indian family who just got baptized last year in December. And their uncle, still from a devout Hindu family, but their uncle has some liver sickness issue back in India. And I had the privilege of praying for their uncle over the phone back in India. Probably if I was in India, and I'm just saying it as an example, if I was in India, that may be a little harder to call someone, in the States or someone in the West. But it's been a great opportunity to meet influential people. These are not only people of peace, but people of influence, where you get to share the gospel with them, and they even open up doors for you back home, wherever that is in South Asia.
And I think that, that's wonderful. Now let me switch our conversation and talk about our city, Metro New York area, especially in New York City. And in that context, I want to discuss the idea of church planting. How hard is it?
Yeah, it's very hard. That's the simple answer.
Okay, so let me clarify. How hard is it in a sense that so I know back in Pakistan, my dad has a church, and it's a Muslim country, of course. And then now I know that both brothers started their own churches. In other words, planted their own churches in two different communities. I also hear from other people who are planting. So they don't even know what it means to plant a church. They don't use the word planting churches. Even for me, it was a very somewhat new term when I got here in the United States, because I planted a church in Greece while I was there in a Bible college. And when I finished my degree program there, on the day of graduation, the director of our school, because there were other Americans, so he said that, and he made a big deal and complimented my work. And then he said something to the fact that here we have a church planter among us. He planted a church in Athens. And to me, it was not a big deal. But when I got here, I was like, oh boy, it's very expensive. It's extremely hard. I tried to plant a church in Brooklyn, but it was so hard. So I leaned literally, I made a willful decision, not only lean toward, willfully I made a decision that, okay, I'm going to work for a church where I can have a proper salary, health benefits, etc., etc. So back to the question, how hard is it to plant a church in the context of family when you need to meet the needs of your family? So there is the financial aspect, and then time commitment, because you gotta care for your children, for your family, and for your self-care. And so then the energy level, because New York City consumes a lot of energy. So those are the three specific areas that I was thinking when I said, how hard is it?
No, this is such a crucial question, really, for every Christian, actually. And in our context here in New York City, I think how we understand church planting, how we define success in church planting, what kind of goals and expectations we have. If we are not clear about them, I think it can be so disastrous, and we can hurt many people along with ourselves. And as this pandemic for us, and for me personally, at least I will speak, has been just a season that has exposed the things that I've been chasing after. And as a church planter, I think it has shown how I define success. As the pandemic has taken away many things away from us, it has really helped me see things afresh. I was talking with a denominational church leader recently, and he was sharing with me, saying that churches for whom it has been Sunday-centric, building-centric, and pastor-centric have been the ones who have been hurt most. And I think this is so important to know. If we are only Sunday-centric, if we're only building-centric, and if we're only one pastor-centric, I think it really doesn't, or I can confidently say that it does not reflect the biblical model of church planting. And yet, that is often the model that we, that we usually operate in. So, as far as our context, Dr. Javed, I am understanding church planting more as parenting. And like I mentioned earlier, I have 4 kids. Their ages 6, 4, 2, and 2 months old. The youngest is 2 months old. And really, church planting and pastoring is a long process. And living in New York City, I feel like New York City is like the third soil. Remember the parable of the four soils? And I think it's the third soil that is the thorny soil, where the things of this world, the desires of this world choke the seed. And that's how the seed is not fruitful. And I feel like living in New York City, everyone is chasing the American dream. And I
including
think
the church. Including the church. And that's why I think we really have to ask ourselves, how do we define success? And I'll be honest with you, right now, the way we are defining success is by saying small is big. Small steps of entering into relationships, making small difference in the way we love our neighbors, like that is huge success. So yeah, you are right. It even begins, in our church culture. So to say the last thing, there's so much to say, but let me just say one last thing. The way I've been starting to understand church planting is something that Alan Hirsch really helped me with. He said,
rather than just thinking about church planting, where we often picture a building, we should be thinking of gospel planting, where we are planting the gospel seeds and allowing that to grow. I think the danger for many of us is we live in a technology world where everything is so instant. But the kingdom has a picture not of technology, but of agriculture. And that takes a lot of patience and a lot of prayer.
Yeah. And I think the problem that I see in our context, which is urban setting, you're also dealing with one, this expectation that comes with being in New York City, that you gotta make it in this city, so you gotta get a better building, better music. So there is a idea of competition, almost like even within churches. How can I do better? What do I need to do? And then there is also issue of so there are so many models. One of that is attractional model, and when it comes to attractional model, you have to church planting attractional model. You have to constantly cater to the need of your audience, right? And in this setting, it's hard to have a building in New York City because that's very expensive unless you are around for many decades, like Calvary Baptist Church that been around over 170, 3 or 4 years now. So it's like almost reaching 175 years around here. And or you get the other issue is, I think, what is expected of a ministry in New York City is to be ready to respond to ongoing problems. For example, right, for the last year after we were hit by pandemic, which I'm going to talk to you briefly. 2, we were hit by one of the largest movement in our days or in recent time for civil right or racial injustice against racial injustice took place right here. It started right here and became a global movement. And 3rd, for me, being in Manhattan, just only a couple blocks away from President Donald Trump's residency, I also saw a lot of political division where both sides, people from both sides, Democrats and Republicans, showed up. And so there are so many, and then constantly we are under the threat of terrorism. So we have a lot of these things happening, and church is not immune to these things. Church people who go to church are people, so they live among other people, so they get tangled with those kind of things. So let me bring you back. So we were talking about church planting and having those gospel centered churches, planting gospel, right? So do you think when you, as Alan Hirsch advises, if you follow his model, if you have those small communities, if you have those gospel planters and planting those house churches, do you think those churches will do better and will not be affected by what's going on in the city as the culture changes, as the politics continue to do what it has always done, as the racial injustice movement catching up and more people are involved? Do you think the house church will be somewhat not involved? How is it going to affect the house church?
Yeah, and I think this is really a conversation worth having. As you rightly gave us the backdrop of what we are all going through, where this time last year, we all had to, in essence, evacuate our buildings. We could not even gather together. And yet we know that, events may be canceled, but the church and the mission of God is never canceled until our Lord comes back. And I think for every church, I really hope it allowed us to consider and reconsider what our mission is. Even for us, we actually were meeting at a Muslim restaurant, and that's a whole different story, for about 4 years. But when the pandemic began, it allowed us to start meeting in smaller house churches. And I'm just sharing with you through experience. In the 1 year that we have done house churches, we have grown so much more, not just numerically. Maybe numerically we are smaller, but we have grown deeper in our love for Jesus and for one another.
Wow.
I'll just give you one example. Just recently, in our small little house church, we were going over John chapter 3. We're talking about, for God so loved the world, that whole verse. And I just asked this question because it's more discussion oriented. It's more of a conversation rather than, just 90% proclamation, preaching. And, Dr. Javed, I want to be very clear. There is a place for proclamation. There is a place for preaching. I think the danger is if that becomes the main thing only. I think there is a danger in that. And I'll give you the example for that. When we were talking about John chapter 3, and I asked our small little group, does anyone know whom Jesus was having a conversation with in John 3? Several of them grew up in church most of their lives, and they could not remember whom Jesus was talking to in John chapter 3. And when I asked them to read verse 1 and 2, and then they read about Nicodemus, they were surprised. They were like, "Oh, we forgot." And so I think a lot of times, in the way we do churches, it can be very knowledge based. But in our little house church experience, it has allowed us to grow together as a family. It really has given us a sense of a family. And I think this is going to be the most effective way of making an impact in our neighborhood. I think that's how the early church did it. Where individual lives were transformed, families were transformed, and the way that they lived in the neighborhood. Basically, the way transformation happened in the early church was that their love for one another in the house churches began to overflow into the neighborhood. And I think that is what we need. Rather than going to this space on Sunday that we rent or that we, call our sacred spaces and almost make it a place of escape or refuge. And I'm not saying that is how we look at it, but it can become the culture where we meet a couple of hours every Sunday. We feel good about ourselves. We feel community, but then that is it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. Well, as we close, tell me a joke. You were not expecting that, were you?
No.
Man, you definitely, it was a very serious talk, a serious topic. So, yeah. Tell me a joke. It could be a dad joke.
Oh, I have a lot of dad jokes. In fact, we even write them down. So let me see.
That's another thing you and I share. I write them down too. So when my boys do, I have 4 years old, 2 years old, and my twin girls.
Right.
They are, I have twin girls. They are 7 months old. So it's pretty neat. So give me the joke.
Gosh. Okay, our 2-year-old. Oh well, we were going over the story of David, and I think we had said to him, remember Jesse, the father of David? And he said, no, 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 no. Jesse is the cowboy girl from Toy Story, Woody's friend.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I do when my children say things like that. Yeah, I record them too. Wow.
So that's not the best joke, but still, it's
That's
every
funny.
day there is something or the other.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much again. So there you have it, folks. Until next week, I would say think on some of these things that Boto shared with us, and I'll talk to you guys next week with another guest. Until then, God bless you all.
You've been listening to Our Urban Voices with Dr. Alphonse Javed, which presents Christian narratives through diverse voices that impact urban ministry. Please check back for new episodes every week.